Hey guys, Professor Biohealer, realizing that something we talked about on the very first day of class made its way into the homework, and we haven't talked much more about it, so I thought I'd give you a little bonus video here, just adding a little to that discussion, maybe help you with some of the homework questions. So one of the examples we talked about on the first day was a woman who sues her employer saying they've discriminated against her on the basis of sex. They're not paying her as much because she's a woman. So she's saying, if I were a man, you would have paid me more. Since I'm a woman, you paid me less. You should have to pay me what you would have paid me if you were a man. And I said one thing they would do beyond getting testimony from this woman and her bosses and her colleagues is probably hear expert witness testimony that uses quantitative evidence. So get some statistics in there, right? And I mentioned, and I put an equation up on the board, but I said don't let it scare you. Just because there's Greek letters doesn't mean this is scary. This is a regression equation. It is the sort of tool that would be used by an expert to present evidence in a case like this. And regressions are powerful tools to answer a lot of questions that we're interested in, whether it's in academic research or whether it's a business trying to make sense of the best policies to have to make as much money as they can, to have happy workers, to do the things businesses want to do. And in this case, regression is a set of tools that could help us have evidence that could shed light on whether Susan, this woman, is being discriminated against or not. To talk about that regression setup a little bit more, I'm going to talk about the general setup if we want to understand how much money people make. So this is the workhorse sort of model in labor economics. What we're going to do is we're going to say we want to better understand how much money people make. So we're going to measure that in terms of wages, how much we make per hour. That's going to be what we call a Y variable, an outcome variable. So I'm writing on a piece of paper here. I've got a Y variable, wages. It's an outcome variable. That's the name for that type of variable. On the right-hand side of this equation, I'm going to put predictor or explanatory variables. These are X variables. These are things that are going to help us understand what's going on with how much money people make. And so what variables would I want to include in a regression to better understand what people's wages are? Well, I want to know what level of education they have. So education is one variable I'm going to include on the right-hand side as an explanatory variable in my equation to better understand what's going on with wages. Another one, as we talked about in class, is experience. I want to know something about how long people have been working, because I know that people who have work experience, they know stuff that they picked up while doing that, so they tend to make more money, just like people who have higher levels of education generally make more money. Now, as you and I know, there are people who drop out of school pretty early and jump into the workforce at a young age, so they tend to have high levels of experience and low levels of education. Other people might go to school for a long time, guilty as charged, and so, I have lower levels of experience but high levels of education. Some people have both. Those people are almost by default going to be older. Young people are going to have low levels of both. What a regression is going to allow us to do is kind of tease apart how these matter when we look at how much money people make in an area, a company, whatever the population is that we're looking at. And so here we have education, experience. We're also going to need a variable for the sex of the worker. Now, why do we need that? Well, that's going to tell us if men or women earn different amounts at this company. But this is different, including sex in a regression setup like this, is different than just looking at the average amount of man earns at this company and the average amount of woman earns at this company. Why is it different? Because we've also included education and experience as explanatory variables here. And so what we're doing by including education is we're saying, here's a measurement of how much this matters for how much people earn. We're going to measure that, note it, and kind of set it aside, hold it constant. So it would be as if we're looking at workers who have the same education level after we've taken the effective education and set that aside. We're doing the same thing with experience. And so holding constant, setting aside how much education people have, how much does experience affect how much money we make? And so again, we're going to come up with an estimate of how much this matters, and we're going to control for it. So it's as if we have people who are identical education level and identical experience level, and then we're looking at the difference between men and women, if that's what this variable is right here. And so that's why regression is so powerful, because it allows us to control for other explanatory variables, set those differences aside, and focus on the difference that we really care about, whether that's in a research setting or in this case in a lawsuit. And so what would we want to include if we're trying to better understand how much money people make at this company? That's our outcome variable. We want to include all the things that we think matter so we can control for them, so we can set those aside. We talked in class about how if you have some measure of productivity, man, that would be great. We often don't have a good variable for that in data sets, but some jobs, there's a piece rate. There's a measurement of how many widgets you make per hour, how many, in sales jobs, we often have a pretty direct measure of how much sales revenue are you generating. We can control for that, right? So we can see how much money people make after setting aside these different things. We'll often include something like, I'm going to say occupation. We expect a manager to earn more than someone who's not a manager, right? And so we can actually control for what type of job you have within this company. And so we want to include anything that we think matters that will help us explain differences in what people make at the company, and setting the effect of all of those aside, if there's still a difference between what men and women earn. It's not necessarily discrimination, but most courts would see that as evidence consistent with discrimination. And so if that paired with stories of people like Susan are presented in court, pretty often that would end up going her way. If, on the other hand, after controlling for education, experience, productivity, occupation, title, things like that, there's no difference between what men and women earn, even though there may be a raw difference. Maybe men earn more at this company than women. Well, maybe it's because the men have been there longer, because the men are in more management positions. Depending on the lawsuit, that might be muddied waters if the claim is that they don't promote women on the basis of discrimination. But Susan wasn't claiming that. Susan was claiming these people doing the same job as me are earning more. They're men. I'm a woman. I think it's because of sex that I'm not earning as much. And so this setup would be pretty good evidence of whether that's happening at that company or not. So that's kind of a primer on how we think about setting up. We study an outcome, a y variable, and we use a set of different explanatory variables to better understand what's going there. And the big advantage of this set of tools is it's going to allow us to control for things we know matter or have reason to believe would matter, and set those aside and focus on the things that we really care about. So that's the little special bonus video for today. That'll help you with some of the questions on this week's homework. Thanks.